Hello, this is Dr. Stanley Lang. Welcome to this video. And today I'd like to talk briefly about why you might want to consider cutting gluten out of your diet. And I'd like to tell you a story of a patient that I've been following for a lot of years who has gluten intolerance. And this is a pretty good example of what happens when time goes by and people that aren't medically oriented sort of lose their focus. So this is a patient that started to develop diarrhea about 2 months ago. And I saw him for that problem. I see him regularly for some other issues, but not very frequently. And so he started to have this diarrhea that was not causing him much pain. And he also has a neurological issue that was not worse. So when I saw him for the diarrhea, I gave him some instructions, reviewed with him that he needed to make sure he was doing gluten-free. He said he was, said he understood what it was. And so I suggested, well, maybe go dairy-free also, since he was not restricting dairy at the time. So when he came back a month later, he was still having diarrhea. And all of his tests were normal. The blood work was normal. And the next step was going to be a lot more investigation because of his age and this new worsening symptom. So I decided just to double check and take a dietary history, and went over what he's eating in his lunch and supper consistently. And sure enough, he was eating quite a bit of gluten. He'd just forgotten what it was in. And so the solution for his problem was simple. He just needs to go back and really do a gluten-free diet correctly. Now, what are the two reasons that I alluded to that one should consider cutting out gluten? There are some people that say that everybody should cut out gluten, and that might be true. I don't think the evidence is there for 100% of all of us should cut out gluten. But a lot of people do have sensitivity to it. There are some people that claim that over 60% of people have antibodies to it. If you've got antibodies to it, then you're definitely having an issue with it. But the two areas that I wanted to at least mention that a lot of people don't think about is the first group is any kind of a GI disturbance, including reflux. Now, gastroesophageal reflux or disease or heartburn is a very common problem, and very few people connect the dots between gluten sensitivity and this issue. And so a lot of people, if they simply go 100% gluten-free, their GI symptoms get a lot better. And they were having gluten sensitivity issues without really realizing it. The second group of people are a fairly broad group of folks that suffer from fairly mild neurological symptoms that we would group under the category of brain fog. So brain fog is pretty hard to define, but for people who have it, it's not hard to say I've got it, because there's just this sense of having trouble concentrating. It takes a lot more work, mental work, to think through things. And so any kind of a brain fog issue very often is a gluten issue, or an issue that gluten sensitivity is aggravating. So brain fog is very common in Lyme disease, for instance, and gluten sensitivity will definitely aggravate Lyme disease, as just one example. So this is another area where a person could very reasonably, as a next step, completely cut out gluten, just because it could be causing the brain fog or making it a lot worse. Now, a much more serious issue in that same area is that gluten sensitivity has been implicated in the development of dementia and memory loss as people get older. And I've also seen this many times. So there are some memory experts that actually the first thing that they will do is ask the patient to completely eliminate gluten. And that's a wise thing to do also. So one reason to cut out gluten, if you're having any of these issues, is that it may be putting your brain at risk. And you may be putting yourself at risk for long-term memory loss and dementia. So what is gluten in? Why did my patient confuse this? Well, I'm not quite sure why he confused it, because it's not that hard to identify the foods that have it, but there's so much in our diet that it's easy to slip up and start eating these foods. As another patient that I saw today admitted to, she has mild GI symptoms, including reflux, and she admitted that when she was gluten free, she was completely symptom free, but occasionally she would eat gluten foods and she'd get stomach distress symptoms. And it's tempting to think that, well, that's all it is. I'm just having some stomach issues. I can live with that. But a lot of these folks are actually having problems in other organ systems that they don't know about, including the brain, because gluten sensitivity is a lot more like an autoimmune disease than a food allergy. It's not at all like a food allergy, but it is a lot like an autoimmune disease. And if you're triggering this to happen in your body, then other organs can be bothered. And your only symptom might be that you're having some mild GI symptoms, gastrointestinal symptoms. So the foods that gluten are in is basically wheat, barley, and rye. The wheat, barley, and rye cover a lot of foods, mainly wheat, of course. So that includes, for the American diet, breads, pasta, crackers, cereal, and pretzels, and many, many foods that are what we would call processed, because wheat is often put into, elements of wheat are put into that mixture of chemicals that the food industry uses to come up with these processed foods. So you have to cut out all of that stuff. There are a lot of other alternatives that we have nowadays that some of them are pretty good, some of them are pretty bad as far as gluten substitutes. But the point is, it's not nearly as hard as it was 15 or 20 years ago to be gluten-free. So there's really serious health issues for why one should consider being gluten-free. And I encourage you to be serious about it if you're having either the GI symptoms or the brain fog symptoms, because there's a risk that you're actually damaging your brain from the gluten. So I wish you well in your goal to become as healthy as possible. If you found this video helpful, please like the channel and give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Have a good day. God bless, and talk to you later.